It appears something is happening or brewing at Marvel Comics that I just didn't think I would ever see in my lifetime. They might actually be making another good Blade comic book. The character feels like he should be important. He was in an enormous film. He's about to be in another enormous film in the MCU. We might have something worth your time and money, and here to talk to me about that is a big old Blade fan himself. Doc, how you doing, buddy?
I am good. This is, I did not know that this book was coming. Now that I'm starting to read a little bit about it, I'm actually really excited.
I was also completely unaware that Marvel Comics were releasing a new Blade book this month. They actually forgot to tell anybody, and actually has a pretty good writer on it, Bryan Hill. Not the greatest comic writer in the world, but certainly has done some very strong stuff in the past. Specifically, I would talk about Killmonger, which is absolutely brilliant. And Blade is a big-time character, or he should be a big-time character. He's not just a superhero, but he crosses over into that horror genre. Horror comic books are really hot right now. I don't know why Marvel wouldn't put this character front and center. But basically, anytime you've seen the character in the last 5 years, it's been Jason Aaron on his Avengers run, which is absolutely terrible. It was Mark Russell continuing the Blade Vampire Nation, where he's the sheriff of vampires, which is a really stupid concept that never should have been brought forward. Or it's been Dany Lore creating Blade's daughter bloodline. You can't really think of many worse writers to actually be working with this character. Like, he had no chance.
No, he really did not. Although I will correct you. Dany Lore didn't create shit with Bloodline. That was all created by, oddly enough, Tim Seeley, of all people.
But he just too white, so they had to hold off until they found someone the right skin color to do it.
Yeah, he just wasn't allowed to write it because he had the wrong skin color, apparently. Look, we've seen Blade get essentially the short end of the stick at Marvel for quite a good number of years now. Him being kind of front and center in his own book with his own direction that isn't just being tacked on as a little bit of backstory in a much larger, team title is probably ideal, especially with a movie coming out in the not too distant future. You want to have that character very central, and you want to have an ongoing title with him as the main character and not just kind of floating around without any direction.
This is what comicbook.com had to say in a recent interview with Bryan Hill, which we'll get to here in a second. Marvel's premier vampire hunter is back in an all-new mission and facing a terrifying new threat. The superstar team of Bryan Hill and artist Elena Casagrande are teaming up for a new Blade series that launches in July. Blade recently spent time as a member of the Avengers during Jason Aaron's multi-year run, with the Daywalker also serving as the sheriff of Vampire Nation. Fans have also gotten to meet Blade's daughter, Brielle Brooks, and follow her origin story in the recently concluded Bloodline Daughter of Blade miniseries. Bryan Hill, really interesting guy. He was doing a lot of comic book work, and then he basically just said, you know what? Never mind. I'm just going to go concentrate on screenplays and writing for TV shows. He's done a lot of work in Hollywood. Obviously, he was working on the Titans show. Yeah. So he's got a lot of writing credentials, and he has done comic books in the past. And like I said, the Killmonger series that he did was absolutely brilliant.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed his time. He's done a bunch of work over the years with Top Cow as well. I really enjoyed his time on Aphrodite 5 and was kind of disappointed whenever he left. Yeah, I'm looking forward to Bryan being back in comics. Maybe not full-time, but often enough to give me an ongoing.
In the interview with comicbook.com, they asked Bryan Hill, your new Blade series comes at an interesting time for the character. He just met and trained his daughter, and he was the sheriff of the Vampire Nation. Where do we pick up Blade when the series begins? This is what Bryan Hill says. Well, I looked at Jason Aaron's run with Vampire Nation, and it always felt like a period in Blade's life, but ultimately not what would really satisfy him as a character. And so there's a digital comic called Blade First Bite. That's a Marvel Unlimited exclusive Infinity comic, which kind of goes into the disquietude and why that wasn't working for him and sort of chronicles a lot of events in his life. It kind of leads us back into the story we have, which is more of, I think, what people expect from Blade, more of the nomadic dark hero thing, I think draws us into the character. Absolutely correct. Jason Aaron's direction for Blade was absolutely stupid. It made no sense. And Bryan Hill and Marvel Comics are smart to go, you know what? Let's just create a digital comic book, explain where all that stuff went, and actually put him somewhere where he belongs.
Yeah, it seems like this is just their way of writing themselves out of the corner that Jason Aaron had written them into in the first place. Get him into something that feels more appropriate for a Blade solo series and for the Blade character himself, because nothing about him as sheriff of Vampire Nation and teaching a daughter seems like any sort of the Blade character that we've known, loved, and expect to see in a movie.
Absolutely. And when we're talking like he's the sheriff of Vampire Nation, maybe people don't recognize what that means. Like he was like the UN in charge of Vampire Nation in Russia. And he was just sitting there watching vampires eat people, watching vampires turn people. And he was like an administrative oversight and was going out there and doing the bidding of the like vampire leaders when they had a problem. It made no fucking sense whatsoever for the character at any time in the history of the world.
At no point in Blade's history do you think he would be perfectly acceptable taking orders from Dracula. But that's exactly what we had for the majority of that series. Him being Dracula's lackey.
He also talks about Blade's daughter in that answer, and he says, as far as his daughter goes, she obviously exists in the Marvel Universe. I'm not dealing with her very much in the first arc. One of the things that I think is really important for comics as a whole is for the layperson who has a brief understanding of the character and an interest in the character, maybe because they saw a movie or because they just saw this or that, to be able to walk into a comic book store and pick up something and have it be familiar, not have to catch up everything from the very beginning. Also, a very smart move to just remove Bloodline altogether from Blade when you're relaunching it. That character has no future whatsoever because, first of all, it's redundant. You already have Blade. Who needs Blade's daughter, whose mission is the exact same as her father? It's absolutely stupid. But you also had Dany Lore basically launch the character, which is, I don't know, a death sentence for the character. There was nowhere left to go because no one even cared at that point.
It's a dead character, but at the same time, Bryan knows that, well, he can't just straight up eliminate her and write her out or kill her off in the first arc just to get back to the status quo. So instead, he's just going to ignore her because you're going to have all kinds of Twitter weirdos all mad at him. So his solution is the much more simple, I'm just not going to address it.
It was also stupid just from the beginning because there are characters out there when I go, man, I wonder what it would be like for Superman to be a dad. Now, that's not the most exciting superhero story, but it's something cool in the background. Blade's not one of those characters. You're like, you know what? You know what would be awesome? I would love to see how Blade would be if he had a daughter that he never met until she was an adult. Like, that would be amazeballs. That would be a really interesting way to discover the character or maybe build him out. It's like, nobody wants to see that. I want to see Blade kicking ass, taking names, and murdering vampires. That's who he is.
Nobody wants to see Blade as a dad. I mean, it's like having Wolverine running around as a dad. It's a way to damage the character fundamentally. We saw it happen with Wolverine, and now we're just seeing it happen with Blade.
Yeah, it's absolutely smart. So he's doing the right thing. Forget about Vampire Nation. Forget about the sheriff or whatever. Forget about the daughter. Let's get to actual Blade stories. But he's not just taking things away. He's actually being additive. He's got some new characters of his own. He says, the question was, Adana is a new threat you're introducing in the book. From the first look images that were recently released, the character looks pretty intimidating. What can you tell us about Adana's effect on the supernatural corner of the Marvel Universe? This is what Bryan said. Well, one of my intentions with Blade is to create a seismic shift in the world of monsters and the occult within the Marvel Universe as a whole. And so without giving too much away about the Adana is something primordial. I wanted to bring in something Byzantine, something older than really old, that has come with the singular goal of ushering in hidden evils and monsters and atrophy of the universe. Kind of embodying all that and bringing that character into the Blade book has been really interesting. That she is a primordial force in a lot of ways and will have both a direct and indirect effect on the world. Absolutely sounds good. It makes sense. Why not introduce a new good bad guy that's been around forever, but is now coming out of the shadows to bring back monsters and the occult into the Marvel Universe and make it a little bit more interesting. As far as the character design, I've seen a lot of evil characters in comic books with like a mask and a hood on. I'm sure when it comes off, it'll be more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the design's not all that really, doesn't really pique my interest all that much. However, I like the idea of expanding the mythos of the vampire or monster section of the Marvel Universe. We haven't really had much of an expansion in that in a good long while now. Doing something to really be additive in that portion of the Marvel Universe is, I think, absolutely necessary. We've seen enough Blade fighting Dracula, Blade fighting knockoff Dracula minions over the last 50 years that the character's been in existence. We need some new level of evil for him to be fighting against with a new goal. Dracula's goal for the last 50 years has been, I want to usher in a vampire Earth, which kind of gets old. Magneto was interesting in X-Men because his goals shifted over time. He remained relevant. Dracula just feels he's stuck in the past. And
Dracula's mission doesn't make sense either. Once you turn everyone into vampires, what are you going to eat? You're just going to starve to death. Get out of here, man.
Bringing in something that's got a different motivation, a different goal, and can be additive here. And not necessarily just to replace Dracula, but to be another, nemesis for Blade is, I think, absolutely necessary in getting the character over. It's one of the reasons why his ongoing books never lasted beyond like 30, 40 issues, because you can only fight Dracula so much in 40 issues. Give him a bigger rogues gallery.
Absolutely. I couldn't be more excited about this. I didn't think I was going to be excited for a Blade comic anywhere in the near future, but, Dany Lore's gone. Mark Russell's gone. Jason Aaron's gone. We've actually got a good writer, Bryan Hill, who normally in the very first issue, and I imagine that's going to happen in this series, he does a good bit of world building while also presenting a mystery that's really exciting. And then he pays it off with something absolutely enormous in the second issue. So do not wait on this one. If you want to be ahead of the curve, you want to be reading a comic book that's going to have something almost guaranteed to be exceptionally exciting at the very beginning, you definitely get this series.
Absolutely. I almost always recommend things written by Bryan Hill, and I'm not going to change that recommendation this time around.
If you are a Blade fan and you stepped away from the comic books, maybe the Jason Aaron stuff just wasn't your deal, you thought Bloodline, that sounds stupid, and you would like a reminder about just how bad things got while Blade was just treading water is not the right term. He was just dead and buried. Mark Russell had this Blade Vampire Nation special one-shot plus-size issue. I believe it was supposed to be a miniseries, but they realized how stupid it was and how bad it was, and they made it this one comic book. We reviewed it and talked about how bad it was, how it never understood who the character of Blade was, and just everything about this was terrible. Definitely check that video out right here. There's also a link in the video description.